Okay, so for this project, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be making a postcard from another planet or another world. Um, so you're going to create a postcard. It's going to have a couple unique elements. So the main focus for this project is going to be we're mixing raster and vector graphics. So what we're going to be doing is using both Photoshop and Illustrator to create this postcard. The final format is going to be in Illustrator, but we're going to be pulling raster graphics from either JPEGs or Photoshop into Illustrator using what's called the place method. And that's a feature in Illustrator that allows you to utilize raster graphics and then filter them in Illustrator to get basically a vectorized effect from those while still retaining those originals, so you can go back and modify if you need to. And I'm going to show you guys that here in just a second. So what I've got here right now is I have a JPEG that I downloaded from CG Textures. It's free to use, and I recommend going there, checking out your free to use resources for this project. So what I'm going to do is, this right now is just the JPEG in Photoshop. I'm going to go to File, Save As, and I'm actually going to save this as a Photoshop document, and you'll see why in just a few minutes. So Photoshop, save, and for this project you're going to want to keep everything in a folder. The reason why is when we're placing something in Illustrator, it's creating a link to that file. So your Illustrator file is basically drawing a line to that resource. If that resource's name changes or its location changes, that link is going to break in Illustrator. And Illustrator isn't smart enough to know what you've done with that file. It's essentially like writing something down and then cutting a sentence out of that sheet of paper and throwing it away. It's gone. That sheet of paper has no idea where it went. That's sort of how Illustrator treats an event like that. So I've got my Photoshop file. I'm going to go into Illustrator and I'm going to make my canvas for my postcard. And the postcard size that we're going to be using is 6 by 4, so 6 inches by 4 inches. You can do this tall or wide if you want, but 4 inches by 6 inches is what we're going with on this one. And I'm going to click OK. And now what I'm going to do is, to get this started, I'm going to place my raster graphic. And to do that, all you're going to do is go to File and Place, or it's Shift-Command-P on the keyboard. So I'm going to click on Place, and then I'm going to go to my folder that I made where I'm keeping all of my resources. And I'm going to choose my Photoshop file, and I'm going to make sure link is checked, and I'm going to hit place. So what this is going to give me the option to do now is I can click and drag this out and set it to the size that I want, or if I just plain old click, it's going to drop it in at its largest size possible without getting any sort of pixels sort of distorting or becoming very obvious with it. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to click once because I want to see how large this actually comes in. And pretty decent size. So this covers the majority of my canvas area. You can see the black outline denoting where my Illustrator canvas is. So I'm going to go with that. I'll just line it up so it looks good to me. So now that I've got this placed, there's a link between this Illustrator file and that Photoshop document. So when I go and save this, I'm going to save it into the same folder. Click OK. So if I go to Window and Links, what this is going to do, this is going to show every relationship between this Illustrator file and an external file. So you can see here under Links, there's a little entry for my landscape desert Photoshop document. So you could have 1, you could have 5, 10, 15, however many resource documents linked to this, and they all show up in here. So what is the benefit between bringing this image in this way as opposed to copying and pasting it in? So what we can do is, with this document in here as a placed image, I can go back to Photoshop, and I'm just going to really quick here change this by making a mark on it. So I've done that. I have a new layer with this on it. I could take this away if I wanted to. I'm going to hit Save on my Photoshop document. And now when I come back to Illustrator, it's going to say, something's up. The original file that's linked, something has changed. It's either moved locations or it's, had some sort of state change to it. In this case, I added that mark to it. So it's asking if I want to update. I'm going to hit yes. And what you're going to see is you're going to see that update happen within Illustrator. So in a less messy practical application for this, I could do something like, if I'm working with, postcard from another world, I can come in here and do something like a non-destructive color change to make this look a little less like Earth. Make it kind of, you don't see too much purple sand on Earth, so I'm going to throw that in there. I'll get rid of that strange mark I made, and I'm going to save this. Back to Illustrator and update. And now I've got this resource where if I'm not liking the purple or later I need to go back and change it, I can go back to that Photoshop document and alter it to suit my needs. So that's one benefit to using a placed file. And you can do a placed file where you've masked it out and it's transparent. You can have transparency in there. You can use pretty much either a JPEG, Photoshop file, a GIF, a PNG. All of those file types can be placed within Illustrator. Okay. And as long as that link is maintained, you can keep going back to it. You can also, there's options down here. If you've updated and saved and it's not updating, you can choose the link resource and force an update. Locate the file, go back and edit the original. Reset the link. If you decide to move everything to a different folder, you'll have to come back through, click on your resource, and hit the relink button. It'll open a browser window. You choose it, hit place again, and that will fix the broken link issue. Okay, so one other feature for you guys to play around with on this. We can bring raster graphics into Illustrator and then basically have Illustrator process it into a vector for us. And this process is called image trace. So what I'm going to do is, I've got this placed. You could do a copy and paste, but again, there's a benefit to placing this over copying and pasting it in. You can maintain that original document and go back and modify it in Photoshop and have it update over here in Illustrator. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select my resource, and up along the top here you'll see a button for image trace with a little down arrow next to it. This is also under the file menu, object and image trace. I like to use it over here. I click the little down arrow And it gives you a couple preset options depending on what you want to do. You could bring in black and white line work and use one of the presets on here, and it comes out pretty good. All depends on what your graphic is and how you want to treat it. So for this, I want this to look, pretty vectorized. So I'm going to limit the colors to 6. So when I click on this, what you're going to see happen is Illustrator is going to start to basically crunch the numbers for me and figure out what it can do with 6 colors and also make this image look like sand dunes at the same time. So I'm going to click on this. And if you're working with a very large image, high resolution image, it is going to take some time. These computers are pretty good, but they're not the most stellar in terms of their computing power. So what you can see here is Illustrator has taken that image and done its best to use only 6 colors and sort of retain the quality of the image. Now this image was kind of complex to start with. The more complex the image is, the harder the time Illustrator is going to have using a very limited color palette and making it still resemble its original form. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to choose my image again, and I'm going to hit this little square right here to bring up the image trace options. And I'm going to expand advanced here just because I like to see all of my options for this. And what you can do is you can manually adjust the number of colors this is using. I'm going to take it up to 12 and see how that does. It's going to have to go back through and calculate and figure out what's going on. And you also have options for adjusting how closely these paths fit the original. How sharp you want corners to be or how smooth you want them to be. And you have various options. If you're scanning something like black and white line work, you can tell it to ignore the white and just make it transparent and things like that. And as you can see, this does have its own sort of little problems. This image, because it's so complex and probably in part due to the color that I threw on it, it does have some issues where we've got these sort of little jagged, display issues here. And I'm actually going to turn off GPU performance and see if that helps. Okay, so that was just the computer causing that problem there. So as you can see, I've retained that link. I can go back and infinitely edit this photo in Photoshop if I wanted to. I could come back through and say, no, stuff's going to be green now, and drop back to Illustrator, hit update. It'll go through and it'll have to, again, calculate and do all the math for us. But what that allows me to do is I can bring in a raster graphic, a photo that I've taken, or something free that I've found online, something Creative Commons, link it to my document, go back through, treat it in Illustrator, treat it in Photoshop, and maintain that link so that way if I do need to go back and forth, say I decide I want to just take these mountains out entirely, I can do that in Photoshop, save it, and have it update over here. So there's a benefit to having that linked in terms of playing around with your project and editing things. So from here, just to sort of expand on the image trace feature, if you bring something in, say you've got black and white line work, you bring it in and you want to change the lines around. There's instances where that's going to be easier in Illustrator than it would be in Photoshop. Same for whether you're dealing with a photo or whatever it might be. There's going to be a situation where you need to adjust the shapes within Illustrator. So what we can do is we can expand that placed image and basically break it out so we have all of our little points to play with within Illustrator. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to dial this down just to make it a simpler grouping of shapes for me to work with here. You can see as more complex the image is, you can imagine what this would look like if we expanded it into actual shapes. There'd be a couple hundred of them here. Dial it down once more. And you can actually get pretty creative with this. It's starting to kind of look maybe a little more like ocean waves or something like that at this point. So what I've got is my placed image. I've image traced it. So now what I can do is I can hit expand up here at the top while it's selected. And what that's going to do is that's going to, basically, it's not a link anymore. It's dropped it within the document. It's changed it to actual vector shapes, objects within Illustrator as a group. So if I select one thing, it's going to select everything. You'll have to go to Object and Ungroup to break things out. But what that allows me to now do is I can come into here and start to play with these shapes. So if this was something like line work, I could come through and start modifying the line work. I could start adding to it using things like Pathfinder and my pen tools to modify that shape in any number of ways. So that's sort of an extension of being able to image trace. You do lose that ability to go back to Photoshop and make some changes there. So you kind of have to be committed to what you've got when, before you hit expand. Otherwise, you'll have to go back, place the image again, and go back through your image trace process. So what you guys are going to be doing for this project is you're going to need to have at least one placed image in your postcard, and when you hand this in, you're going to hand in a compressed folder. And I'm going to show you guys how to do that. So this folder is going to need to have your Illustrator document, and it's also going to need to contain that placed graphic. Otherwise, when I open it, it's not going to show that graphic. So it's something you guys are going to have to be aware of and make sure that you set up correctly when you do this, which is why I'm right off the bat saying keep everything in a single folder. Keep your Illustrator document and all of your resource graphics right in the same place every time. That's going to save you a lot of headaches later on. So the requirements for this are 4 inches by 6 inches for your postcard. It can be either landscape or portrait. You have to have at least one placed image. Anything beyond that is up to you. If you want to mask stuff out and drop little aliens in, different stuff like that, add elements from other photos, that's entirely up to you guys how you do that, or you can draw in within Illustrator. You don't have to design the back of the card, it's just the front. And what this needs to have is it needs to have your standard, greetings from wherever text on it. And don't just slap that in as regular old typeface. Consider that as well as part of your postcard. It should look inclusive. It should look like it belongs there. You often see, on some of those older postcards from like the 70s and the 80s, it's kind of 3D looking text. And there's features within Illustrator that you can play with to sort of get that effect. If you type it out and then come up to effect in 3D, there's some interesting things for you guys to play with, and I'll let you play around with that and experiment with that. But your text should look inclusive. It shouldn't just look like it's just slapped over the top of it. I don't want to see just a placed image with greetings from Mars written on it. That's not going to be an acceptable final format for this project. So put some thought into it. Really consider what you can do in terms of utilizing placed images, using Photoshop and Illustrator together to create a design. And we'll tackle a few other different features along the way as we go. A couple things I'll show you guys. Maybe I'll do a demo on some of the 3D text stuff later on. I haven't really played too much with it. but you can get some pretty good results from that. So at least one image, 4x6, landscape or portrait, your one placed image, and text that looks inclusive. And you don't have to, the back is not required. If you want to, it's up to you. You can go ahead and do that.